Welcome back to another segment of License to Legacy. I'm host Javi Trujillo, and joining me once again is Bill Koenig of the Spy Command. How are you today, Bill?
Oh, I'm doing okay, Javi. How about yourself?
I'm doing all right. And of course, Mr. David Leigh from the James Bond dossier is here as well. How do you do, David?
I am doing very well, thank you.
Good. Well, let's just get down to business, shall we? We're here to discuss the 65th anniversary of Thunderball.
60th.
60th. It came out in 1965, but it's the 60th anniversary. As I was saying that, I'm like, that doesn't make sense because we just did Goldfinger and, okay, yeah, 60th of Thunderball. Thunderball was released in the U.S. on December 22nd of 1965, with the UK getting it December 30th of 65. It grossed $63.6 million in the U.S. and $77.6 million worldwide. Now, that's all unadjusted. Going by the website thenumbers.com, adjusted for inflation, it has grossed $712 million compared to Skyfall's $432 million, which is Skyfall being the number one if you look at the numbers unadjusted. If you account for everything, Thunderball has actually made more money than Skyfall.
Well, another way of looking at it is, I believe the global total for Thunderball was something like 141 million in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
And no Bond movie exceeded that until Live and Let Die. So, number of films in between.
Yeah, quite a few in between. So this really was a peak for Bond for quite a while. I think Moonraker was probably the one that got closest to this in the years following, looking at it unadjusted.
I've looked at the tables. In the U.S., no Bond movie exceeded Thunderball until Moonraker. Again, I'm speaking strictly of the U.S. figures. Yeah, I mean, Thunderball was a big deal.
I mean, round-the-clock showings is a pretty big deal. And you also have to consider, too, because a lot of people look at box office numbers and, there's one way of just looking at the simple numbers, but you have to take in the context of it. And, how many movie screens do we have today, these 20-plex theaters compared to 1965 where there'd be maybe 2 screens, but, most cinemas were one screen.
Plus, there are many, many more options for audiences now. We've got streaming TV where there's almost unlimited viewing possibilities. There's video games which didn't exist back. That there are so many more things that people can do to distract themselves. It's not really a like for like comparison, but it's the best we can do.
If you couldn't see Thunderball in 1965 in the theater, you didn't see it because VHS wasn't a thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
They also rolled them out differently. You would start with the big theaters, like, say, downtowns, and then it would, kind of go out from there. So, it's not like today where you've got 3,000, 4,000, whatever screens on opening weekend. It took a while to, for a lot of people to even see it.
Yeah, my first viewing was on TV. I don't know what year, but certainly I remember from the 1970s that it used to take at least 3-4 months for new films to reach the provinces. In London and the big cities, they would be out immediately, but we used to have to wait forever. The one I can really remember is Star Wars, because that, I think it opened in December 1977, but it didn't get to our local cinema until about March or something like that. It was around Easter time.
So do you remember what year your first viewing of Thunderball was, David?
My first viewing of Thunderball, it would have been the late 70s. Let's see, Dr. No, I think was 75. And I think they started showing every 6 months, so it was probably 76, 77, I would say. I don't specifically remember seeing Thunderball like I remember the first viewing of the first 3, but by the time of Thunderball, I think we just got so used to starting to see the Bond films on TV that I don't really have a firm memory of it.
How about you, Bill? When was the first time you saw it?
Sometime probably the spring of 1966. I saw it at a drive-in. So, I mean, exactly how long after it first came out, I couldn't exactly tell you. But the fact that it was a drive-in indicated the weather must have been warming up because, it came out at Christmas of 65. Yeah, a huge screen, obviously. Although at drive-ins, they had these little speakers you put on your window. And the sound, it's not like Dolby today, anything like that. And then
was it a double feature or was it just by itself?
It was by itself.
Okay.
This would have been sort of that, the latter part of that initial wave.
Okay.
I did see it later as part of a double feature with You Only Live Twice. Once must have been 1970. And then again, a few years later, probably just before it was going to be on TV, because it went on American TV in 1974.
Okay. I think I don't, similar to David, I don't have a specific memory of when I first saw it. I just know it would have been in the early to mid 80s on VHS. I don't even know if I saw Thunderball or Never Say Never Again first. I couldn't tell you which one I saw initially, or if I made the comparison that it was a remake.
I've just looked it up, and the UK television premiere was the 26th of February 1977.
All right. I wasn't even alive yet. Almost.
Yeah, it would have been a bit difficult for you to see it then.
Yeah. How often, David, do you rewatch this movie? I know it's one of your favorites.
It actually is my favorite Bond movie. God, how often do I watch it? I'm not really sure because I try to vary my Bond viewing a bit, and I don't really watch the Bond movies as often as I used to. So I haven't seen it for some time, but I am planning to watch it soon just because it's its 60th anniversary. Well, one thing I do remember, though, was that after the first few films in the UK, they started showing the movies on bank holidays. And for some reason, they showed it on consecutive bank holidays. It was, okay, what's our Bond film going to be this bank holiday? It's like, oh, Thunderball again.
Bill, how often do you revisit the film?
Oh, I don't keep to a set schedule. I'm kind of like David, and I try to vary my Bond viewings. So maybe once a year, occasionally, maybe more often, maybe twice a year. But, you got 25 films plus the non-Eon films, and plus what I tend to do is I tend to binge watch things that I like, and which involves old TV shows as well. So it's a big, giant rotation of things.
I just watched it last week for the first time on the new Connery 4K set. So it's been a minute, I think, since I've watched it from start to finish, because Thunderball is one of my favorites from the Connery era. But it's been a while since I've watched it from, the beginning to the end, because oftentimes I'll put on just a moment or a scene, or it has a lot of great vibes to this movie. And I like the pre-title sequence. Like sometimes on a Sunday, I just want a little taste of Bond. And, I'll just throw on the pre-title sequence just to get that fix. And the Thunderball one, for whatever reason, I go to a lot just because, I don't know, there's just something about it. I like his suit. You get the iconic jetpack. You get to see the Aston Martin. And it's just a quick 5 minutes in and out, little fight scene, great score. And I feel like I watch parts of it more than I watch it as a whole. But, watching it on the 4K and picking the alternate audio was a nice change of pace to get to hear some of the different sounds. The score, particularly when you get to the end of the film, since the VHS version I owned had music that was similar to, I think it was like the Best of Bond 30th anniversary CD. And then when I got it on one of the DVDs, I think they switched up to the music, so it was just the Bond theme generically placed over it. I'm like, well, that's not how my CD is or how my VHS is. And there's a special feature on the DVDs and the Blu-rays about talking about all the variances and the different dialogue lines and cues that were changed. Do either of you have a preference to which version you watch? I don't even know if they're designated.
I prefer the one that's on the VHS you own. I think it's on the VHS that I own. In 1995, there was an Eon-sanctioned James Bond fan convention in New York. It was the same week. It was on a Sunday, and GoldenEye was going to open in New York a few days later. And so at one of the early gatherings, one of the early sessions, they made this announcement, noting how there were two different, but from now on, we're just going to go with the James Bond theme. And I'm like, well, what? So I don't know. So that version's on my DVD anyway.
And David, you said it was your favorite. For me, I kind of alter. It depends on my mood, and I'll alternate between this and Goldfinger's my favorite Connery. It's definitely in my top half of Bond movies. But Bill, where does it fall for you in your Bond fandom? Is this a top of the shelf, middle, or bottom?
At or near the top. I mean, it's the first Bond movie I saw. There was, in November of 1965, a television special on NBC, The Incredible World of James Bond. And they showed, it was an hour-long special. They showed extended clips from the first three movies. And then in roughly the last quarter of the show, they had some behind-the-scenes stuff of the then upcoming Thunderball. For example, you see Ken Adam at his drawing board, and he's sketching the SPECTRE boardroom. And the camera kind of zooms in a little bit, and it fades to the actual scene from the movie. There are some shots of them filming. It was at Silverstone, where the Ford Fairlane explodes, and you see, Bob Simmons was driving the car, the lead stunt guy, and he had a close call. I mean, it was, he definitely earned his money that day. I'm trying to think what else. Anyway, but you see some behind the scenes stuff. At one point, for people who can recognize him, you can see Harry Saltzman talking to John Steers, the special effects guy who would win an Oscar for the movie. So yeah, it's just very interesting. And finally, the last shot they show, it's a shot they obviously filmed but did not include in the movie, which was once the car sprays the water at the thugs, the Aston Martin then pulls out, and the narrator has a witty line about, I forget the exact phrasing, but as we say goodbye to the incredible world of James Bond. Yeah, so like I say, it's something that ended up getting edited out of the movie itself.
I'll have to put that on. I haven't watched that in a while, and I think that the three of us, we come from generations who got a lot of value out of these TV specials because there wasn't a lot to. It's not like today where you can go onto YouTube and watch something or doing the press kits the way they do. It's like that's kind of all we had before you could watch them at your leisure. I know, like I mentioned, I think before, like the 25th anniversary happy anniversary 007 that Roger Moore hosted right on the cusp of The Living Daylights coming out. We had that on VHS that we had taped off at television, and I would get so much of Bond content of rewatching that because that's all we had. I didn't own any of the movies yet at that point. They weren't necessarily as readily available. You can't go onto your phone and buy them, so that kind of had to tide me over for years until I got to, own them. And I imagine it was pretty similar for you as well. If you didn't catch that at home or have a way of recording it, like movies.
A lot of my Bond experience in the 1980s and 1990s was from videotaping the movies, and sometimes watching live at the same time and editing out the adverts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Just grabbing them off the TV and just watching them until the tapes broke.
Well, to give you an idea of just the anticipation for Thunderball. So Goldfinger had come out in the fall in the UK and at Christmas in the US. United Artists in calendar 65 brought back the first two films as a double feature. That was the beginning of a tradition of Bond double features, re-releases hitting the theaters. And there were like various TV things that took note of how Thunderball was coming. People don't remember the Ed Sullivan Show these days very much, but it aired live out of New York. And so at one point, Sullivan went down to Nassau, and they did this as a film segment that was shown on a live broadcast. Anyway, he goes down to Nassau, plays golf with Connery, talks to members of the crew. It's a short segment, but it's just an idea of just how this was getting hyped. And then later in the year, I think it was after the movie came out, Tom Jones appeared on the Sullivan Show live, singing Thunderball. And then there was another live show called What's My Line, which was a panel show. It was primarily a panel tries to figure out the occupation of a contestant, but the big draw of it was they had mystery guests. And with the mystery guest, the panel wore blindfolds, and the mystery guest did his or her best to disguise their voice. So Connery appeared on What's My Line in October of 65. Now, it was kind of, you could sense they were kind of tiptoeing around this because Connery's wanting to talk about The Hill, which was about to have its New York premiere. But inevitably, Bond, came up in the panelist who correctly guessed it was Connery was character actor named Martin Gable, who had appeared with Connery in the Alfred Hitchcock movie Marnie. So, yeah, anyway, but I mean, this is just, a sampling of things that were being shown periodically throughout the year and into the next year.
I'm trying to picture Connery trying to disguise his voice.
He does as high voice as he possibly can.
I was watching it earlier, actually, and yeah, it's surprising how high-pitched Sean Connery can sound, yeah. To the extent that one of the female panelists says, "Oh, I can't tell whether you're male or female."
Yes,
yeah, really.
Yeah. Well, and Martin Gable asked, before he guessed correctly, he said, "Are you a man?" And it was like, sort of like, he was like slightly perturbed. And he's going, "Yes." Like that. Yeah, but it's pretty funny. And, and I think Gable, when he correctly guessed, said, "Are you now or have you ever been James Bond 007 or something like that?" And actually, Connery broke into a smile. They were doing their best to downplay it, but you just couldn't do it forever.
Well, that is our normal salvo of opening questions. Let's get a little bit more specific here. When talking about legacy, Thunderball has quite the complicated one. And while I don't want to get too bogged down in the details, the origins of this film have caused ramifications that have lasted until the Craig era. Kevin McClory's rights to certain aspects of Thunderball been a hindrance to 007, or have they brought about exciting possibilities in the 60 years since?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. 10 years ago, I had a chance to read one of the Jack Whittingham scripts done for McClory. And in fact, the title's not Thunderball. It was Longitude 78 Degrees West, not the sexiest title. And in this, it's dated early part of 1960. In this script, the mafia are the villains. You have Giovanni Joe Largo, and there's no Domino. There's a woman named Gabby instead. Felix gets more screen time, and the script ends unhappily. Gabby, Gabby's in the plane getting away with, the other bomb, and she sets it off, and Bond talks about how gutsy she was and stuff, and it was like, and it's just it's. Well, it's not the Bond movie we're used to. And so, yeah, it's a mixed thing. It was also the first time that an outsider got Eon's cooperation. And it made sense because originally Eon wanted to make Thunderball the first film. I have a copy of Maybaum's 1961 script, and it was written before the parts were cast. The stage direction simply describes Bond pretty much straight out of Ian Fleming, describes Blofeld pretty much straight out of Ian Fleming. But overall, it is fairly similar to what we'd get in 65. And then there's this, it's funny. So in the 61 script, it's, very literally, straight out of Fleming. In the 65 script, okay, Bond's a big thing. And so in the stage direction, for that opening scene, the pre-titles, it's like the one, the only, the something of the oppressed, the, just how big a deal Bond is. James Bond! Like, it's like, I mean, the page just drips with swagger. Because, again, it's, he's writing it, or they're writing it at a time they know it's going to, they could have put a test pattern on for 2 hours and it would have been a success just given, how popular Bond was at the time. Just the move between the 61 and 65 scripts is interesting. And it would not have been possible had Eon not agreed. Okay, Kevin, all right, we'll work with you. And I looked at this years later in the local library. Esquire magazine put out a special issue, and it's got Connery in a white dinner jacket on the cover. Then inside there were like Ken Adam production designs and an article by Richard Maibaum about how the Bond films worked. He described, basically, according to Maibaum, essentially McClory sat at the same table with Broccoli and Saltzman, and it was collaborative. They had, and this shows up in some of the documentaries on the home video about how, you could be a key grip, but if you had an idea they liked, they might put it in the movie. So he was definitely. He was definitely involved. He wasn't just a producer in name only. In that Incredible World James Bond special, they show a shot of McClory with Terrence Young. They're on a boat drinking champagne in between takes. So, I don't know. There are a lot of Bond fans who despise Kevin McClory, and they blame him for Ian Fleming's early demise just because of all the stress from the lawsuits and so forth. But at the same time, if you had something that you thought somebody stole and you were in a position to do something about it, it is an interesting, and as you say, Javi, mixed legacy there.
Yeah. Well, what I think is interesting about it is that, the film is very, very close to the book, and Thunderball is possibly my favorite Bond novel as well. And, I think a lot of it is the themes in the story, the bad guys getting nukes, and which really tied into the kind of atomic age paranoia. And I think it was certainly the Bond film for the times that it came out in. But I don't know how much the novel benefited from the fact that Fleming swiped other people's ideas to use it. Probably quite a lot. If I want to be kind, I would say that he was naive because he had used television scripts for the short stories that are in For Your Eyes Only. So there was a precedent there where he had reused material with the TV show. I don't know how much input other people had into that, and how much it was just his own work. But I think he was just trying to do the same thing without stopping to think, hang on, how much of other people's work is in this? And so how much of their work am I swiping for my new book? But, I think, possibly that's the reason that the plot is so good, is that other people were working on it other than Fleming.
Right. And also it was a pretty quick deal where McClory would be involved with Thunderball, because on the UK prints of Goldfinger, it says James Bond will be back on Her Majesty's Secret Service. But then the US prints, which came out a few months later, say James Bond will be back in Thunderball. So it was in the fall of 64 that they did the deal. It's funny because Charles K. Feldman, who had the rights to Casino Royale, then he tried to do the same thing, but he wanted a lot. And so much so that Broccoli and Saltzman said, no, thanks. So Feldman tried to follow in McClory's footsteps.
I do think that there's a negative way that McClory tying up Spectre and Blofeld, and that is basically, it goes, it takes it all the way to 2015 and Spectre, because, and because Eon hadn't been able to use Blofeld and Spectre until then. I can't remember which year exactly they got the rights back.
2013.
2013. Yeah, but then then it's like they felt obliged to use Spectre and Blofeld immediately, but they didn't think it out properly because the modern Blofeld is a disaster.
Well, that kind of leads me into my next question. Should Spectre go away again, or should they be a persistent thorn in Bond's side? Because of McClory, Spectre, like he just said, was off the table for a while. Obviously, Gardner used the concept of it and Blofeld in his some of his continuation novels. But, by and large, they were gone for, decades, with the exception of like the remake of Never Say Never Again. Now that we've just had their return in the last two films, should Amazon look to Spectre or should they make something new?
I don't think so. I think Eon really screwed it up badly. I think they've made Spectre unusable for, say, at least 10 years. Because I would like to see a decent set of Spectre movies, because it is good to have that kind of that kind of continuity, if you understand, with different actors in each film. I think maybe they could employ the same actor to play Blofeld through several films. And prior to actually having him on screen, of course, he was always off camera, just a voice or, hidden. And so I would like to see, 3 or 4 films with Spectre, as long as they're not made every 5 years, but, every couple of years. Right. Yeah. Again. Or I think that would be fun to see, a few films with Bond pitted against the same enemy, but I just don't think that's possible, because they took this classic Bond villain and just threw him away.
Well, and it was even worse than that, because before they came up with the Christoph Waltz version of Blofeld, they had considered making Blofeld a African warlord. Blofeld was an alias of some kind. They had considered making Blofeld a woman, but they didn't do that. And it was kind of like they felt stuck. So with the Christoph Waltz version, he dresses like Donald Pleasance and Charles Gray and Telly Savalas as well. They resorted to the scar around the eye.
There's the cat.
Definitely the cat.
And the cat, And it was like let's just go back to this, I guess. These other versions aren't working out, because I was thinking when they got the rights back, he doesn't have to wear a Nehru jacket or whatever you would call that. It's like in his first 2 appearances, when it was Anthony Dawson's body and Eric Pullman's voice, he's wearing a business suit. Why can't it be a business suit? And anyway,
if the McClory things didn't happen, do you think Eon during the Moore era would have run the concept of Spectre into the ground and just have them be the overarching villain for the Moore era? Like, is it a good thing that they took a break from using the characters and the concepts?
Yes, I'd say so. Remember, in the early versions of the script of The Spy Who Loved Me, it was going to be Spectre, except there was one version where there was like the young people of Spectre overthrow the ruling class of Spectre, and they're gonna be more serious, and they just want to burn things down. But then McClory was suing, and they were suing McClory, and so they took it off the board, basically, because originally all the henchmen would wear black like the Spectre bad guys did. Instead, they wore orange, something that could not be mistaken for Spectre. In the end, I think it probably was just as well they gave it a break, whether they wanted to or not. But
I think it was probably better they had a break as well, because there is such thing as too much of a good thing, and if Spectre is the baddie in every single Bond film, then it starts to become a bit stale. You need to get a bit more creative and, think outside that, I think. Otherwise, I think probably Bond wouldn't have lasted as long as it has.
It's like bringing it to Batman. Like, the Joker is Batman's best villain, but you can't have every Batman story be Batman versus the Joker. You have to trick it up. And even though, Spectre wasn't necessarily a main focus of some of the earlier films, their presence was felt in all of them all the Connerys but Goldfinger.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you go to like the video games, and then it gets complicated. I want to say it was GoldenEye Rogue Agent, where it wasn't Spectre, it was Octopus, and Goldfinger was trying to fight other factions for control. And
in the From Russia with Love game with Connery doing the voice of Bond, they also called it Octopus.
Yeah. That's part of the legacy of Thunderball is how it affected and the rights affected how Spectre was used in various other media. I mean, we don't have Quantum really without Thunderball and what happened behind the scenes with Thunderball. So,
and just talking about Octopus and Spectre, because the sign of Spectre is wearing the octopus ring, but if you look at the early versions of it, I just wonder if it was supposed to be actually a ghost rather than an octopus, because it doesn't clearly have 8 legs or anything like the modern octopus logo. And why, if the organization is Spectre, why wear an octopus ring?
It's a very good point.
And not just the ring. In Blofeld's aquarium in From Russia with Love, there's this big Spectre logo, octopus logo on the bottom of the tank.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Yeah. It's easy to overlook.
Mm-hmm. Well, gonna have to pop in the 4K again when we get done. And speaking of that, I think it's time we put a quick pin in this conversation. Are you gentlemen both free to do part 2 and continue this episode?
Yes.
I would love to, yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with part 2 of License to Legacy Thunderball. Take care.